EricJanPhelps today with 24/7 World Radio, coming to you live and direct from Newmanstown, Pennsylvania on February 19th at about 3:20. And welcoming you to the broadcast. And I trust you're having a wonderful day today. With me on the broadcast will be our most illustrious guest that I thoroughly enjoy having, and it's Brother George Widger. So, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast on this Monday, February the 19th, 2024.
And thank you, brother. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you, and happy President's Day here in the U.S.
Yeah. Okay, so happy to begin, and please go ahead and take the program here and go ahead and start with what you have for myself and our listeners today.
Okay, and I can address that as soon as I get to with the scripture verse. Now, I know you have brought this up before, but I just thought I'd give you my take on it. The scripture verse is, the passage is Genesis 9, verse 6. Genesis 9, verse 6. Whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made. I'm sorry. Somebody keeps shrinking the print on my Bible. Maybe I should increase the font size. No, I'm going to be turning 55 in a few days. And, well...
George, I'm old enough to be your father, so don't give me any excuses. Go ahead.
Well, you know, I actually share, well, according to the Gregorian calendar, I share the same birthday as George Washington. And no, I actually was not named after him. My aunt had an uncle named George. But I also... I'm sorry?
Good. George Washington was the greatest man of the 17th century. 18th century, pardon me.
Yes. So, I share the same birthday, February 22nd, according to the Gregorian calendar, as I said, George Washington, Ted Kennedy.
And a crook. Go ahead. I'll try not to comment. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. Well, you know, the more you comment, that means that's the less work I have to do. And
no, George, if you remember, you're telling me that, well, I need to cover some things and I wasn't able to get them all. So now I feel bad because I was commenting a little too much and I did not enable you to get your topics covered. So I'm trying to be a little more courteous and thoughtful with regard to what you want to do. So go ahead.
Well, this is basically a tennis match. You know, quid pro quo. I share something, then you share something.
Yep.
You'll bring up some factoid that I had never heard of before. Or, oh, have you heard of such and such book? No, Brother Eric, I haven't. Oh, I highly recommend it. Well, anyhow, so as I said, today here in the United States is President's Day. It's February the 19th. Now, it used to be that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln had two separate birthdays. So you usually get them off back-to-back Mondays. But to be more inclusive and more diverse, and they said they decided to...
Okay, inclusive, diverse, all those communist words. Yeah, go ahead, George.
Well, in the spirit of that, I thought we should embrace this day, and as I said, a happy President's Day. And
well, we need to remember Washington's birthday because he was the founder of the greatest nation in world history, apart from the nation of Israel, and Abraham Lincoln, who was the destroyer of the greatest nation in world history, with his war between the states when he decimated the Protestant South. So one created it, the other destroyed it. Go ahead.
Well, however, over the last couple of years of Lincoln's life, say last year or two, he seems to have had an epiphany. Now, whether he was regenerated, I'm not sure. But towards the end of his life, he did resist the temporal power of the Jesuits, as you have stated, and others have as well.
Yes, he did.
Because he was not a big fan of the post-war amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. As a matter of fact, he was strongly averse to them. Also, he thought that the free slaves in the South should have been repatriated to Africa. They should have been sent to places like Liberia.
He wanted to send them to Mexico too. Yep. But he definitely did not want integration, miscegenation, or interracial marriage. Absolutely not. Yep.
And of course, in all fair, now something I've said to you before, people will say that there are close to 200,000 free blacks in the North who fought for the Union Army in various capacities and actually in combat units. Now, something most people don't know is that there were something about 100,000 free blacks in the South who served in the Confederacy. Now,
Sure.
most of them were in ancillary capacities such as cooks, orderlies, grave diggers. However, they did serve the Confederacy. They wore the Confederate Union. They received the same pay as their white counterparts, and they were all volunteers.
Yep. Well, they had an idea with
so this is something.
They had an idea what the Yankee Union savages, communists, would do when they got into the South, and so they hid their black children in the swamps in Florida. And there was one great big rapine and plunder on the part of the Yankee North, with all their Irish Catholics in the Yankee Union Army. And so that whole story has never been told. And it's utter condemnation for any blacks who wanted to fight for the South. There was nothing but a bunch of Uncle Toms. When I've read from a youth's history of the Great Civil War, how this one black was encouraging all the white men to fight and to resist the Yankees. I mean, it's all there. But so that's why I specialize in history. I keep that history alive, so it's never lost to the socialist, communist academia of this country.
Okay, and something. Okay, can I just address the scripture verse, Genesis 9, verse 6? I've heard people say, so-called liberal theologians say, well, you need to understand the context in which Moses wrote that. You're talking close to 4,000 years ago, or whenever it is he lived. Penology, which is this science of prisons, didn't really come about until the 19th century. So you're talking about roughly the last 2 years. So things are different. Of course, you had to execute dangerous people, murderers or rapists, because housing them was a problem. You didn't have the development of modern prisons until relatively recently.
And
you couldn't have these steel and concrete.
That's a result of white Protestant nations upgrading their prisons. Yeah.
Okay, so I would make an argument, and some people say, well, yes, that was an Old Testament administration, in the new, that was God's law. In the New Testament era, we're in the era of grace. Some people would argue that, and of course, well, I would contend that there are several reasons why you want to put murderers to death or other violent people. One, they can escape. Two, they can still orchestrate crimes while they're still incarcerated. Or three, they're a threat to those who are inside the prisons, not just other prisoners and guards and staff, but volunteers, visitors, people who are just there, doing their jobs. So this whole idea that, well,
yeah, you can't rehabilitate
capital punishment for the death.
Capital punishment for murderers is true in every dispensation, whether it's promise, law, grace, or millennial kingdom. The Lord Jesus Christ will put murderers to death in the millennial kingdom. So that's good for any dispensation. So anybody that says we're under grace, grace has to do with salvation. Grace has nothing to do with government and punishing evil, for which reason government was established. Government was established to punish evil and reward good. 1 Peter chapter 2, Romans chapter 13, period.
Well, amen, brother. Now, I just would like to talk about some recent current events, things that have taken place this year, 2024. I guess in January, Alistair Begg, who pastors a church in Cleveland, Ohio, it's called Parkside. Now, I spoke with you this morning, and you said you never heard of Mr. Begg before. Well, I guess he's been there since the 1970s, and he's one of the darlings in the so-called neo-Calvinist movement. He's friends with John McCarthy and other. He was friends with Sproul, R.C. Sproul, the big names and the so-called.
I was in his church in Florida. Yeah.
You were.
Looks like a Catholic church. You got the big 3 doors, one small one on one side, another small one, then a big one in the center when you go into the worship room or whatever, the cathedral or whatever you want to call it.
Okay, I probably should know the details better, but I guess in January, a lady, I guess, emailed him, and he brought this up during his sermon, saying that her granddaughter is getting married to her girlfriend. So her granddaughter is a lesbian, and the grandmother was wondering, should she attend the service, the ceremony, whatever it is you want to call it. And Mr. Begg's response was, yes, she should attend and bring a present, because even though Alistair Begg opposes same-sex marriage, is the cliche, hate the sin, love the sinner. So no, the grandmother is not condoning her behavior. She's just simply showing her love. And so this created a bit of a backlash. So a number of radio stations across the country have dropped his program.
Good for them. Good for them.
And so he was supposed to be going to a conference, I guess, in Southern California next month, Shepherd's, where he has been a regular speaker there for decades. And so he got uninvited. So Alistair Begg is from Glasgow, Scotland. You've ever heard him, he speaks with a very heavy Scottish accent. And as I said, he calls himself a neo-Calvinist, whatever that is. However,
a neo-Calvinist is just a secret Roman Catholic Arminian, but go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not going to cast any
secret Roman Catholic
I have
Arminian Pelagian. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyhow, I have listened to him before, and okay, I don't mean to sound nitpicky. He preaches from the not inspired version. I mean the New International version, and that always.
Good. He preaches from the Jesuit orders NIV, where Carlo Cardinal Martini was on the board of translators, the Jesuits. The good Jesuit NIV. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as I said, Alistair Begg pastors this congregation in or just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. So it's one of the largest congregations, I guess, in the Buckeye State. So they, as such, they have a fairly, I'm sure they're almost certainly 501c3 and all that bad stuff. So they have a huge staff. They have a bunch of assistants. And
it's a business.
Associate pastors.
Yeah, it's a business. It's not a church. Okay. It's a business. It's a religious organization, 501c3. That's right.
Okay, so on their webpage, they list their staff. They have their associate pastors, assistant pastors, executive pastors, parallel pastors, reserve pastors, auxiliary pastors. I mean, they have all these different titles, and they have the IT people and the people who the housekeeping. So, all right, I'll try to keep this as serious as possible. So, the business administrator is a fellow by the name of Tony Gabatasi. I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly. There's Gambatese. And he got his undergrad degree from John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, I don't mean to.
He was trained by the Jesuits.
Okay, I don't mean to pick on him, because I know one of your dear listeners who I correspond with on a regular basis, she got her undergrad degree from John Carroll before her salvation. So I hope that's the situation there. Also, looking at somebody else on staff there. I have it written down. What's his name? One of the elders. I guess that's what they call their deacons there. His name is Pat Presley, is like Elvis Presley. He got his undergrad degree from DePaul University in Chicago, which is a Catholic institution. So,
and it's tied to Loyola. is tied to Loyola in Chicago.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, people, okay, I do have an undergrad degree before I, from a state university here in California, but there's no rule saying that that in order to be a pastor or deacon, you had to go to college. You had to have an undergrad degree or a master's degree or any of that nonsense. That's all Catholic fluff.
All Catholic stuff. You know where my first great awakening was about that? I was stationed in New Mexico, and I was at a gas station with another brother in Christ, the little Southern Baptist church I was going there. And there was this little black boy on his bicycle. And we got to talking, and he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'd like to go to Bible college to be, a pastor of a church. And he said, what? He said, you don't need to be college if the Lord's called you to preach. And I got to thinking about it. Well, yeah, he's right. So this little black boy on a bicycle, probably 12 years old, gave me a nice little lesson in biblical theology when he said that to me. But go ahead.
Now, I know we were talking about Abraham Lincoln, and I realized, he lived, 150 years ago, 160, whatever it was. And he didn't go to law school. As a matter of fact, he was self-taught. He studied under a lawyer, and I realized that was a different era. And he, now for what it's worth, he grew up Baptist. His parents, he grew up in Kentucky, and they officially rejected was it the New Hampshire Confession of Faith, and not to get into all that. And so by the time Abraham Lincoln became an adult, he was essentially pagan. Now, there was debate as to whether he was a Freemason, but near the end of his life, thanks to his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, he started attending a local Presbyterian church. Now, whether he was saved prior to his death, that's a matter of debate. But as I said, near the end of his life, he began resisting the temporal power of the papacy. But that wasn't the point of my comment. In that, Abraham Lincoln did not go to law school. They were around, but very few people could afford them back then. And they didn't have the student loans that they have today. So one of the major canards that has been shoved down our throats is that in order to be successful in life, not only as a lawyer or as a pastor, but anything, is you had to go and get the sheepskin. And then you get more education on top of that.
That's right. And then we got a nice big debt hanging over you that you can prostitute yourself to pay off the debt and justify what you're doing, because I'm going to pay off the debt. So the debt binds them to do something that they otherwise would not do.
Well, I know a few years ago, I cut an interview with Andrew Kaufman, not Andy Kaufman, the actor, from the old TV show Taxi. He said when he was just about to graduate from medical school, this is like 25, 30 years ago, a pharmaceutical rep took him out to dinner and spent, he was single at the time and a fairly attractive woman, and said, hey, Andy, would you like to make some money on the side? I said, sure. Well, all you have to do is just sell our products, push them on your patients. And as I said, so the dinner cost several $100s. And so she took him to a very, lavish restaurant. And he said, this is, I realize, medical school is expensive, and I know you're single at the time, but you like to have children, all that, you're going to have, your children are going to require, ballet lessons and have their teeth straightened, all that sort of stuff. Well, do you think you're going to be able to pay for that just on a salary? And,
yep. What did you say?
So, I'm sorry?
What did you say?
And he said, well, probably not. And so he played ball for a long time. So he pushed the shots. And because, I'm a man of science. I'm, I believe, I believe in modern medicine. So later on, he sort of had a Robert Mendelsohn experience.
Yeah, the great Robert Mendelsohn, who was poisoned.
Yes, a confession. Well, as a matter of fact, that is one of the things that he said that work, Confession of a Medical Heretic is one of the things that basically got him to examine his whole worldview.
That's right.
And he said he was probably doing way more harm than good by practicing modern allopathic medicine.
That's right.
Okay, so just to mention a couple of the things that have gone on recently, I mentioned this whole situation with Alistair Begg. So how should I put this? I used to listen to him on a somewhat regular basis because he did make some valid points. But the Jesuits run his church, even though he calls himself a Baptist, even though he calls himself a neo-Calvinist. He has at least 2 Catholic educated men on staff, and one of whom specifically by the Jesuits. So all intents and purposes, he runs a Catholic church.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You're right.
Okay, so just bringing up, going from stupid to even more stupid. Last week we had what is commonly called the Stupid Bowl, which is the pinnacle of American bread and circuses. Last Sunday, the 11th, you had the championship of professional American football, the Super Bowl, which was the 58th one they had between the San Francisco 49ers and the winning Kansas City Chiefs. Well, last Sunday, there was an event that took place in Houston, Texas, at Joel Osteen's congregation, Lakewood Church, in which a woman, I guess, allegedly came in there about 2 p.m. local time, Central, and was going to open fire, but a couple of off-duty police officers shot her and fatally killed her. Well,
amen, and glory to God. Hallelujah. Hope they went out and had a celebration.
Well, okay, whether that actually happened, who knows? What I can tell you is Houston is in Harris County. Houston has a population of about 1.5 million people. So I believe it's the 4th most populous city in the country. Harris County is the 4th or 5th most populous county. So, and it turns out that Ed Gonzalez is the sheriff of Harris County, and he got his undergrad degree from St. Thomas University, which is in Houston. The deputy sheriff of Harris County is Mike Lee. He got his, Gonzalez got his bachelor's degree from St. Thomas University in Houston, Texas. Mike Lee, the deputy sheriff of Harris County, got his undergrad degree from Our Lady of the Lake College in San Antonio. So the 2 law enforcement officials in Harris County have Catholic educations. Doesn't that strike you as a little odd?
Yeah, well, don't confuse me with the facts, George.
Okay. Now, also, if I can just mention something about Sheriff Gonzalez. Now, he goes by Ed Gonzalez. Now, I don't know what his given name is, whether it's Edward or Eduardo or Edwin or whatever. But now, if you look at him, now my search for this is the Harris County Sheriff's Department webpage. So this is not some sort of conspiracy site. These are all this is all mainstream information. Now, he does appear to be Hispanic. Now, I don't know if his ancestors were from Mexico or wherever. So, okay, how should I put this? So the top cop, the top law enforcement officer in Harris County is Hispanic. He's Catholic educated. The number 2 cop is also Catholic educated. So what is it? Okay, I know I'm the one who's supposed to be presenting here. So would you care to comment?
I'll go ahead, George. Harris County is a very influential county in Texas. That's where Houston's at. And it doesn't surprise me that the sheriff is Hispanic, right? Because that's where millions of them have come into Texas. Austin is in Harris County. The purpose of the Jesuits is to render Texas a blue state, no more Republican, make it full of Democratic, Socialist, Communists, Mexicans, Hispanics that are there illegally, give them driver's license so they can vote and vote the white people right out of vote them into disenfranchisement. So that's what's happening, and it's not going to happen because it'll go into the new right before that happens. But
okay, so
continual, ceaseless agitation against the white people, and this instance, pardon me, the white people of Texas.
Well, okay, so as I said, you had the Super Bowl last Sunday, which is like, I guess, the pinnacle of random circuses here in the United States. Now, it's been de rigueur since the 1970s that the winning coach of the team receives something called the Vince Lombardi Cup or prize or whatever they call it. Vince Lombardi was a devout Italian Roman Catholic. He was a known Freemason, a Knight of Columbus, and a Knight of Malta. Yes, a Knight of Malta. He got his undergrad degree from Fordham University. And before he became football coach, American rules football coach, he was a seminarian. But I guess his handlers said, you know what, Vince, we think you could serve us better as a coach than as a priest. So, and of course, Walter Camp, who was one of the architects of what we call American football in the 19th century, was a member of Skull and Bones. But almost all your major figures in the NFL, your coaches, your quarterbacks, so forth, were Catholic educated, or Freemasons. So just some examples of your famous Catholics coaches: Don Shula, John Madden, Bill Belichick, Mike Ditka, just to name a few. And of course, your quarterbacks, you have Joe Namath, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, Tom Brady, John Elway. I mean, you're talking about a huge number of players.
Yep.
Who are basically modern-day Roman gladiators.
That's right, Roman gladiators. Yep. And the people are the enemy belligerents living on bread and circuses.
Well, I just wondered, did you ever see the movie, the 1953 movie, was it Stalag 13 with William Holden?
I think I did, Stalag 13, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was one of the bases for the later TV show Hogan's Heroes, along with The Great Escape. Well, I believe that came out in 1953. In addition to William Holden, it had Peter Graves. So you remember that one of the entertainments is they had cockroach races.
Yeah, cockroach races, yeah.
Okay, so since they didn't have money, they basically had to barter with other things. They would bet things like cans of coffee, cigarettes, cigarette cartons, candy bars, things like that. So whatever they can get from the Red Cross. And so they would be really happy, they bet on certain cockroaches. And I know this thing is completely inane. Well, have things really changed that much in the last 70 plus years? Or 80? Okay, the movie came out in 1953, so it's supposed to take place about a decade or so earlier at a POW camp in Germany, the fictitious Stalag 13. So they have us distracted and entertained with stupid. The more ridiculous, the better.
That's right. Like Get Smart and a bunch of them. Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, so as I said, you had the Super Bowl. Well, a few days later, last Wednesday, February the 14th. Well, February the 14th last week was significant for a couple of reasons. One is Valentine's Day, and two is the beginning of Ash Wednesday. And I guess
Roman Catholic Ash Wednesday, we can put a little ash on our forehead. Be like the East Indians who put a little ash on their forehead for the third eye. We all be nice to pagan. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there again, just as you had in Houston a few days earlier, you allegedly had a shooting at the convention center in Kansas City because you had hundreds of thousands of Chiefs fans in Western Missouri, and I guess even from Eastern Kansas, who were celebrating because they had to cheer on their team, to celebrate their team after they had won the Super Bowl. Well, apparently a shooting broke out. Now, there again, I don't know all the details, and frankly, I don't care because the whole story is probably completely fabricated. So I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One, the chief of police in Kansas City is a white lady by the name of Tracy Graves. She got her undergrad degree.
She's a white feminazi. Go ahead.
She got her undergrad degree from St. Benedict College in Kansas, which is
she's a white Roman Catholic feminazi. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So immediately, Travis Kelce, who was on the Chiefs, I guess it posted on social media. He's been a big whore for Big Pharma. Forgive my language. He allegedly got the clot shots, and he posted pictures of it on his Twitter or Instagram or whatever he's using. And he immediately posted, he said, how many more innocent people have to die? Congress needs to do something now to clamp down on all these deadly weapons. Now, so I've said this before.
Another excuse to gun confiscation, and no black nation in Africa, no Hispanic nation in South America or Central America or Mexico can own guns. So we got to bring all these white people of North America to get them to give up their guns now because they're a problem.
Okay, so but as I said, he's a professional entertainer. So I wish Mr. Kelce would just simply stay in his lane, ride his unicycle, juggle his bowling pins, and keep his opinions to himself because his views are just as valid as anybody else's. I don't care. So you had this episode.
Better than that, George. Better than that. Just don't go to his shows. Make him starve. You want to attack gun ownership? You're not getting a dime of my money. Yo, we're done. Don't you know what happens to nations that are disarmed, you fool? Go ahead.
Well, actually, what are you talking about, brother? I have no idea what you're saying. Okay, maybe this has happened in Red China, Bolshevik Russia, Nazi Germany, Maoist China, or I already said that.
But throughout Africa,
Castro's Cuba, Pol Pot's
black Africans, they can't own guns. Yeah, I've watched videos, I think in Uganda, where the military whips the blacks through the streets, herds them just like cattle. That wouldn't be happening if they owned guns. Go ahead.
Of course, if you think about what's gone on the last 2 years, where has the tyranny during the whole corona nonsense been the most egregious? In countries like Australia, like New Zealand, like Canada, most of Europe, where people just are
historically white Protestant nations. Those were the targeted peoples. Everybody else was really nothing. That's why they didn't vaccinate all the Africans and vaccinate all the Chinese and vaccinate all the East Indians. Oh no, that's only for white people in historic white Protestant nations to destroy the Reformation and bring us back to the Dark Ages.
Okay. And in the United States, where we still have the thing called the Second Amendment, or at least I think we do, where if you're talking about jurisdictions where the tyranny was the most egregious, over the top, California, New York, Illinois, Michigan, Washington State, Connecticut, New Jersey. Now, whereas the tyranny was bad in other places like, say, Florida or Texas, but not quite as bad. So you see, I've said this to you before, so forgive me for repeating myself. In the United States, we have two major political parties. You have the communist socialist, and you have the controlled opposition.
And they're both socialists. They're both socialists. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, one's openly socialist communist, and they seem to be, the Democrats seem to be hell bent on destroying this country as quickly as possible. Now, in the United Kingdom, the UK, you seem to have a similar situation. They don't use the term Democrat or Republicans. You have Labour with a U. They're basically their version of the Democrats, and the so-called Conservatives. They just simply, the Conservatives, also known as Tories, basically sit idly by while Labour spent basically last century destroying Britain.
That's right.
With every single pernicious policy possible.
That's
If
right.
it's bad, they want to implement it.
That includes that female prime minister for years. What was her name?
Margaret Thatcher?
Margaret Thatcher. That's right. The witch. Go ahead.
Yes. The Dame of St. John of Jerusalem?
Yeah, was she in Dame of Malta? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyhow, so they may use slightly different terminology, but it's basically the same game. So you had this shooting. You allegedly had these shootings last week. One in Houston on Sunday, and one in Kansas City, Missouri. Now, immediately, I remember listening to the communist radio. They said, "Gee, this sort of thing would never have happened in California because we have sane gun laws. When is the United States going to join the rest of the world and pass reasonable gun reform?"
There's more killing in California and New York than any other states. No, don't talk to me about gun laws stopping gun crime. That's ridiculous. There's several organizations that are masters in proving that, including Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, which is probably the top erudite documentary group in preserving your gun rights. Some conservative American Jews.
Well, good for them. And well,
Okay.
few and far in between. But people. Okay, we have been taught for decades, at least in the United States and probably the rest of the world, not to think. We've been told to emote. And what exactly do I mean? Well, they don't want to know what you think about something, how you cogitate about something. They want to know how you feel about something. Well, does that make me sad or does that make me happy?
Turn the country into a bunch of how you feel about something. I don't feel has nothing to do with objective documentary facts and ultimate conclusions that arise from that. Can't do that.
Okay, so the Jesuits have known this for centuries. If they can get people to laugh or to cry, they'll shut down their brain. Mm-hmm. They said, "Oh yes, you should buy this product. You should buy this car. You should buy this aftershave, this perfume, whatever, because it makes you feel important. It makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel attractive, whatever." So they're using these old Edward Bernays techniques, which they developed probably 100 years ago.
Who was Edward Bernays? For the listeners, who was Edward Bernays, Brother George?
Well, among other things, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He lived from 1891 to 1995. So he was over 100 years old when he died.
So he was a Masonic Jew, busy working for the Pope in the destruction of white Protestant Western civilization. He's the one that came out with that ridiculous how to eat bacon and eggs for breakfast, so you get proteined up. So he's agent for the Pope, just like his.
It's something I mentioned before. His daughter Anne who's still alive. She's like 90 something, almost 95, or I believe she's still alive. Well, she was also a professor at both Boston College and Holy Cross.
Oh, so we have this nice little 95-year-old Jewess that sold her soul to the Jesuits for money to teach at their universities. Great.
Okay, so yes. So anyhow, so how they get you is they get you to emote and they want you to know how you feel about things. So bringing back this conversation. Well, gee, I feel scared. I feel safer if we got rid of guns or if we had stricter gun laws.
I want to be safe. Because everybody's got to be safe. Go ahead, George.
And of course, you want to save, the spotted owl and the banana slugs, and therefore, you should donate money to various organizations, and you want to save children from childhood cancer, therefore donate your money to St. Jude.
Yeah, to St. Jude. There you go. Danny Thomas, which has one of the largest pathogenic laboratories in the country, second to none, where they develop cancer and promote it. Wicked sinners.
Okay, so therefore, getting back to the Second Amendment, therefore, we need to clamp down on these dangerous things called guns. We don't. So nobody's safe anywhere. You're not safe in a restaurant. You're not safe at a church. You're not safe at a 4th of July parade. You're not safe at a Super Bowl parade. Therefore, we need to get rid of so-called assault weapons, whatever those are.
So the safest guys out in culture are the ones that are armed.
Now,
that's why you have real safety. People are armed.
Well, I was just talking. I knew somebody who just moved from Northern California to Lawrence County, Missouri, a couple years ago. His name is Matt, and Lawrence County has a population of about maybe 40,000 people, if that, and it's about almost 99% white.
Oh, what a sin! I have so many white people. That's so terrible. Go ahead, George.
Well, anyhow, they have virtually no crime.
Yeah.
All the crime that exists in Missouri happens either in St. Louis in the east or Kansas City in the west.
You got all your blacks.
Statistics.
Vast majority of blacks and Hispanic invaders. And of course, you got the white Roman Catholic mafiosos, but the majority of the criminal gun crime is black and brown. And that's why in black and brown nations, they're not allowed to own guns. Ever think of that one?
Well, yes, and of course, if you think about this, almost throughout the United States, if you take your Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, almost all the crime takes place in Philly, the east, or Pittsburgh in the west.
That's right.
If you take Illinois,
conclaves. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you take Illinois, almost all the crime takes place in Chicago. If you take Michigan, almost all the crime takes place in Detroit. I mean, there are almost endless examples where
we can't draw conclusions, right, George? Because if we draw conclusions that these are predominantly black and Hispanic towns, why, that would be a racist conclusion, wouldn't it? And we can't do that. So we got to include the whites, all of it. And so it's everybody that's doing it. So we can get to the whites and get their guns, and so we can annihilate them. Yeah. Can't preserve the white Protestants or the white Baptists. We can't have any preservation of those people. Oh, no.
No, I just mentioned, Chicago, the Windy City, which is the third largest municipality in the country. Now, it's not the entire city. It's just certain neighborhoods. You're talking certain neighborhoods, basically in South Chicago, Cabrini, or what used to be called Cabrini Green, that accounts for almost all the crime. And if you look at in any city, Los Angeles, New York, New York, it's just certain neighborhoods. It's not the entire.
That's right. Oh, I have a dream. Oh, that a man might be known by the content of his character and not the color of his skin. Hey, I got the content of the character. I got 60 years of documentation. These majority savage blacks, wherever they go, they wreck the place, to the detriment of the minority civil blacks who are Christian people and want to get away from them. Wait, George?
Oh, yeah. So, anyhow, so this massive, whether, I'm not exactly sure what happened in Houston last week or Kansas City, whether the FBI, I can tell you this. I was watching a news feed. Somebody sent me from a TV station in Kansas City. I don't recall the call letters, but they're allegedly interviewing some witnesses, people who were there at the shooting. And whether these people are actually there, who knows? Well, a lady who spoke, he said, oh, yes, there are hundreds of local Kansas City police officers who went into the convention center, which is where the shooting was supposed to have taken place. But she said, oh, and the FBI was there immediately. As a matter of fact, the FBI was on scene before the shooting even took place, which struck me as odd because historically the FBI has only been called in after a crime has allegedly been committed, and jurisdiction.
There you go. FBI only has jurisdiction if it's interstate. FBI has no jurisdiction in an intrastate matter. How did they know it was interstate already? They have no jurisdiction unless there's cross state lines.
or is it they had insider information?
Yeah. Would we believe anything about the FBI anymore? Is it being an honest organization? I mean, we should never believe it in the first place. Created by the first head of it being a French Roman Catholic, a Bonaparte. And you got that sodomite Woodrow, was Herbert Jan Edgar Hoover, who's head of the FBI for almost 50 years, covering up evidence of assassination. That dirty, filthy swine and his homosexual lover, Clyde Tolson. I mean, the FBI's been evil from the very beginning, and certain congressmen warned about it.
Well, yeah, so what does it stand for? Fascist Bureau of Inquisition?
Yeah. Well, there's a book written by Theo Harris called The FBI, J. Edgar Hoover and the Great American Inquisition by Theo Harris. Shows that Hoover was an inquisitor. There's no difference between the Roman Catholic Inquisition and the FBI. Same interrogations, same kind of tortures. I know a guy that was interrogated by the FBI in Los Angeles. Took him 3 stories underground in a back room. It's Inquisition, man. And the Jesuits run the FBI. That's why we got to get away from this military government, declare independence in a state or a county.
Okay.
Continue it.
Well, I know we've spoken about Oklahoma City before. You know, that took place back in April of 1985, so almost 30 years ago. And the alleged perpetrator of that, and I say alleged, was Timothy McVey. Well, the governor of Oklahoma at the time was Frank Keating. And
what was he, George? What was he? A white man? Catholic. What was his religion?
Okay, Irish Roman Catholic, white. He got his undergrad degree. Keating got his undergrad degree from Georgetown.
Beauty. So the Jesuits tutored him and tempered him. Yeah.
Okay, so but after he got his undergrad degree, before he went to law school, which is, I want to say Harvard. You know, somebody will correct me on this, but he spent something like 5 years. Keating spent 5 years at the FBI. Specifically, he is trained in their counterterrorism unit. So why would the FBI need a counterterrorism unit in the 1960s, or why would they need whatever?
Yeah. Why would they need it? It was just created for interstate commerce crimes. Yeah. And it's always given a good rap on the TV, on the Pope's TV. You never hear anything negative about the FBI and its leadership and the criminal things they've done, like covering up evidence in the Kennedy assassination. We can't have that out there. Why, we couldn't have our TV program, the FBI, with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and glorify it as a wonderful operation. It's ceaseless brainwash. The real truth is that it's an inquisition. Theo Harris was right.
Okay, so is there any call or justification for basically a national police force, which is essentially what the FBI is?
No, I told my father that. You know, my father lectured at the FBI Academy. And I said one day in the car, I said, Dad, I said, the FBI is a national police force. He said, GD and Eric, it's not a national police force. I met J. Edgar Hoover personally. I said, Dad, it's interstate. Look what they're doing. Look at the Kennedy assassination. Oh, Oswald shot Kennedy. See, these cops at the top, because my dad was a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, they're all of the same ilk. They're going to protect these federal institutions no matter what, or you can't be a member. So we have to do away with the national police force. Absolutely right. Every state can take care of its own self. It goes interstate commerce. Well, then there ought to be some interstate commerce commission that tracks fingerprints, but not carrying guns and going anywhere they want to go, like G. Gordon Liddy.
One
more thing, since I'm on a tirade, the FBI works with the Mafia. They work together. That's why J. Edgar Hoover denied the existence of the Mafia until 1964, when Joe Valachi finally came out and says, yeah, that's right. There's the commission, there's the 5 families, and then Hoover had to admit to it. Because Hoover used to dress in drag in New York and go to the Stork Club, and they'd be there with his buddy, Frank Costello, the head of the Mafia in New York. They work together. It's disgusting. Sin. It's wickedness.
Well, okay.
A preacher that preaches against it on a regular basis. I'll call him up and congratulate him.
Are you talking about the FBI?
Yes, the FBI and the mob work together. Both have their Knights of Malta in there. You have Raymond Rocca of the CIA. You got Carthodiki Deloche. He was a Knight of Malta Kennedy assassination. And you got Knights of Malta and the Mafia, like Albert Vincent Carone, whose daughter said he was a Mafia Don in the Gambino family. And Albert Vincent Carone was the personal friend of William J. Casey. Both knights all working together for the Pope. That's the danger of having the Pope running your country. They run organized crime. They run the everything. The legitimate police, intelligence agencies. They run it all.
Well, you're talking. You just made reference to Bill Casey, William Joseph Casey. I know we've discussed him before, but there are a number of jokes as to what the CIA stands for: Catholic Intelligence Agency, Catholics in Action, Catholic Invisible Army, and since the 1980s under Casey, Cocaine Importation Agency. Now, something the judges have always been.
I like that, George. Cocaine Importation Agency. Very good.
Okay, so right. The judges are your drug lords, legal or otherwise.
That's exactly right. They're the drug lords of street drugs or prescription drugs. They run all the drug companies, drug production.
Whether you're talking about heroin, opium, cocaine, crack cocaine.
That's right. They run it all.
Fentanyl.
Because you can trace that coming into the country through the CIA. Goes back to Timothy Leary when the CIA was helping him make LSD.
Okay, so how do we? You have these events like the Super Bowl and so forth, and how do you know these events are? The Super Bowl happened, but how do you know the shooting in Kansas City actually even took place?
Yeah,
or anybody got shot, or anybody.
How do we know it wasn't a government off if it did take place? See, our problem is we believe the press, and we got to stop believing the press. They lie to us every single day when they open their mouths. I don't believe the controlled press, whether it's the Fox News or whether it's MSNBC. They're all Catholics. They're all controlled by the papacy, and it's brainwashing the people. And we need to have our own press where we can be break free of this William Randolph Hearst, Henry Robinson Luce, all these former press lords that created a monopoly out of the press, so we can't have the truth because we're under trading with the Enemy Act, and everybody here is an enemy belligerent, and you cannot tell the truth. Everything must be censored during this time of war and national banking emergency since March 9th, 1933. That's why they do it. It's war on the people.
Well, okay, so we're, Brother Eric, I know we're coming up on an hour, and I'd just like to mention at least one other thing if I could, and I would have been incredibly remiss if I didn't. But I guess a couple weeks ago, Tucker Carlson, who used to be with Fox News, went over to Russia, Moscow, and had a 2-hour-long interview with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. And I realize they're both working for the papacy. Vladimir Putin is a known Freemason. He's a known member of the World Economic Forum. He's had at least half a dozen papal audiences, even though he claims to be an Eastern Orthodox. Now, Tucker Carlson, on the other hand.
That's okay to be Eastern Orthodox because the Jesuits took over the Orthodox Church with the Bolshevik Revolution. Then they have their Russian college in Rome where they send their Jesuits and other priests to go into Russia and feign themselves as Orthodox priests when they're really Jesuits. It's like the patriarch. He's a Jesuit coadjutor. That's why I went to the funeral of John Paul II. I mean, the Russian Orthodox Church is identical with the Roman Catholic Church. I had a professor, Herbert Carter, said the only difference between the two is Tweedledee and Tweedledum. All run by the papacy.
Okay, so Tucker Carlson, as I said, the interview was a couple hours long. Now, he used to be with Fox News, but I guess they fired him about a year or so ago. I guess they've tried to rebuild him as the white hat, one of the good guys. Like he's like, they gave us our heroes, our controlled opposition, like Bobby Kennedy Jr., so forth. Well, Carlson is an Episcopalian, so he was like one of the few.
So he's an American Roman
non-Catholics
Catholic.
actually at Fox.
If he's an Episcopalian,
Yeah.
he's an American Roman Catholic. That's what he is.
Okay. So now, for what it's worth, his father, Dick, Richard Carlson, was in the CIA. He was with, what was it? Armed Forces Radio.
Yeah. So that means he was tied to James Jesus Angleton, that wicked sinner. And Casey.
Okay. So now I didn't watch Fox News, but occasionally people would send me clips of Carlson's comedy. And I often agree with him because he said a number of things that made sense, that were correct.
Of course.
Now, Vladimir Putin, went on a big tirade where he's talking about things that have gone on over the last 1,000 years, like how Christianity was introduced into Russia and all that sort of. It went into a bunch of superfluous stuff, and he said, really, why should the United States be concerned about what's going on in Ukraine? Because this is thousands of miles away. Don't you have enough problems in your own country? How secure is your U.S.-Mexican border? I happen to agree with this comment. Also, how big is your national debt? 34 billion US dollars? Don't you have enough problems?
Trillion.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Trillion. I misspoke. Trillion of dollars. Don't you have enough problems in your own country? Why? I mean, so how is it you have all this money to give? Your president, Joe Biden, has all this money to give to Volodymyr Zelensky. And you know what? I happen to agree with him.
For the same reason back in the 70s, they were giving all this money to you, Russia. Giving you grain and all sorts of top-notch technology and building your military for the same reason. Because the Pope told us to. Told the Federal Reserve and the military government to do that. That's why they're doing it. Yeah. There should be no such thing as foreign aid. Not one penny. There's nothing about it in the Constitution. You can only do that when you have an empire. Protestant foreign policy is you stay out of the affairs of foreign nations. Roman Catholic foreign policy is you interfere for the benefit of the Pope. And we'll use these American coolies to do it with their military and their credit.
Okay. So I've heard people make their argument over the last couple of years, saying that the United States needs to be involved militarily with Ukraine because if Vladimir Putin does conquer the Ukraine, he'll head eastward. He'll re-annex Poland.
Typical communist rhetoric, the domino effect, the typical bait that they're put upon us during the Cold War. They're not going to put upon us now. Go ahead.
Okay, so Putin's response is, well, we have no interest in Poland or Latvia or Lithuania or anywhere in Eastern or Western Europe. We have no ethnic enclaves in those countries. Being Russia.
Yeah, well, they're building both sides. May the listener know that this is the Jesuit order building both sides. They control Putin, they control Biden, they control Zelensky, they control every political leader, and then they play that violin with their different strings to the tune that they want to have played. And there's nobody that gets it that has any money or any political power or influence. Or if they do get it, they're not going to talk about it.
So anyhow, as I was saying, well, we've been going on for just about an hour or so. Yes, I did have other topics to bring up, but I probably won't have time to flesh them out.
That's okay, George. I'm sorry for interrupting and taking up your time on these topics. So we'll just have to do this another day. Amen.
Well, actually, can I just bring up one other topic?
Of course. I'll give you a dispensation from the Pope. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ron. Well, growing up, now as I said, I'm almost 55 years old, or God willing, I'll be 55 in a few days. Well, the show that was on back in the 1970s called Rockefeller, starring James Garner. It ran from 1974 to 1980, and they later made TV films. Now, James Garner's background is it's hard to figure. I mean, he was people might recognize him. He played Brett Maverick in the little TV show Maverick back in the late 50s, early 60s, and he was in the
Remember that show? Mm-hmm.
He was in The Great Escape, Darby's Rangers, the Americanization of Emily, a bunch of films that were popular back in the 1950s and 60s. But his signature role was as Jim Rockford, a private investigator in Southern California.
By the way, he played a wonderful part in a movie with Ryan Gosling, and the name of it is called The Notebook. It's a very dear movie, and I recommend it to the listeners. The Notebook.
Okay, so I couldn't find anything suspicious about James Garner per se. He grew up nominally Protestant. He and his brother Jack grew up Methodist in Oklahoma. Now his wife was Jewish. That's the only thing. Now I don't know whether he himself was a Freemason or anything like that. So why do I bring this up? Well, Rockefeller was probably one of those popular shows in his day, and as I said, it's about this hapless private investigator in Southern California who's basically, if Wile E. Coyote were a private investigator, he would have been James Rockford, because he invariably got beat up, shot at, had his kidnapped, arrested, all sorts of bad things happened to him. So I bring him up not because of James Garner, but all the peripheral characters on the show. Probably one of the mainstays of the program was his police officer buddy, Dennis Becker, played by Joe Santos, who got his undergrad degree from Fordham. And Becker later got promoted to, as we say in American English, lieutenant, correspondent, say lieutenant. But anyhow, a couple other recurring characters were Axel Deal, played by Tom Atkins, who's still alive. He got his undergrad degree from Duquesne, which is in Pittsburgh.
Another university. Mm-hmm.
Another what?
Catholic University.
Yes. And of course, his main antagonist on the show was James Luisi, who played Lieutenant Doug Chapman, and who just didn't like Rockford. He said, "Oh, what are you doing in here? Why are you wasting your time?" Things like that. Well, James Luisi, in addition to being a professional basketball player, got his undergrad degree from St. Francis College in New York. So the three main law enforcement characters on the show were all Catholic educated. One of whom actually went to a Jesuit school, Joe Santos. So that was just like,
and that's exactly what the early Ku Klux Klan warned about in the 1920s. Warned about all the Catholics, blacks, and the Jews. They're going to take over the country. And so, at least openly, that's the way it appears. Secretly, a supposed white power structure orchestrating all of them to destroy the historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists of the country. Using those.
So
go ahead.
So I mentioned an example from like 50 years ago, and something I spoke with you about last year was there was a TV show back in the 1960s called McHale's Navy, starring Ernest Borgnine. Almost all the major cast members of that show were Catholic, including Ernest Borgnine.
Yep.
Well, you see this pattern.
He was a 33rd degree Freemason too. Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of television, you see this pattern in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s. Now, I mean, almost all your prominent shows, you see that dynamic. You're usually Catholic educated, Freemasons, or something along those lines, or perhaps Jewish people. And they use the same formula over and over again with each subsequent decade.
That's right.
And of course, one of the, in addition to not having problems with law enforcement, James Rockford, he often was having run-ins with the mafia. He was told not to take a certain case because the mob is involved. Well, they forgot to mention the fact. Well, who runs the mafia?
Yeah. Who runs the mafia? The Archbishop of Chicago, the Archbishop of New York, the Archbishop of San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Philadelphia. All these archbishops are overseeing the mafia families of power. And these mob leaders know they better not ever cross swords with the archbishops, because the Jesuits are the military order to take care of them if they do. The mob is desperately afraid of the Roman hierarchy in this country, and they ought to be.
Okay, because they put them in power and they can remove them from power.
That's right. They'll just contact their CIA boys and say, you need to get rid of Gambino or Lucchese or Colombo because they're doing this. And then the Pope in control of the CIA, have a shooter take out the mobster. See, a mob is nothing for the Roman hierarchy to take care of overnight. The mafia is there to make money for the papacy with organized criminal activity and prostitution, drugs, horse racing that J. Edgar Hoover loved. All the sins of people are now put in business, and the mafia oversees all that sin for the benefit of the Pope.
Okay, so as I said, this is my last point, but the ball is in the air, so to speak. I got a request from one of your listeners in Kansas, and he knows who he is. He lives near Kansas City, Kansas. And he had asked me a couple weeks ago, said, well, how is it that Rudy Giuliani became such a big star before he became mayor of New York, and he was the mayor there on 9/11. During the 1990s, he became basically a media star because he took down Gotti. Now, the official story regarding Rudy Giuliani, who went to Christian Brothers, by the way, among other things, is that he's a
Christian Brothers are junior Jesuits. The Christian Brothers are junior Jesuits. That's all they are. I got a good friend that was educated by them. Go ahead.
Okay, so the story was during the 1980s and 90s, this young prosecutor, Rudolph Giuliani, took down the mob. He took down John Gotti. And a tremendous peril to his own life. He could have been assassinated or whatever, or his family could have been killed.
The Pope gave the order to get rid of John Gotti because Gotti was too public. The Gambino crime family is totally in the hands of the Jesuits at Fordham in New York and the Northeast Provincial and the Archbishop of New York City. But when you become too public and you become the Teflon Don, an order comes down to get rid of him. And that's exactly what they did to him. That's exactly what they did to Joseph Colombo. And a CIA shooter shot Joseph Colombo.
Okay, so the official story is that this great crime fighter, Rudy Giuliani, took down Gotti because he had a backbone and gumption and all. But in reality, is he was told by the Archbishop of New York, where it wasn't Terence Cardinal, would have been O'Connor?
John Cardinal O'Connor, probably. Yep.
Okay, so whoever the Catholic Archbishop was at the time, he said, hey, Rudy, we're going to make you a star. We're going to allow you to prosecute John Gotti.
Right. We'll make you a Knight of Malta. You're going to make you a star. You're going to make a lot of money. You're going to prosecute Gotti. We're going to send him off to jail, and Gotti will die in prison. So in the meantime, we'll put somebody else to take his place, and the New York mob will do just fine. They did that with the other mafia dons. I think Giuliani was involved in that. bringing down a lot of them, like Gambino and Lucchese, I believe, because these old mafia dons told their army to stay out of the drug trade. They were not going to be involved in drugs. And the papacy wanted the drug trade. So they took down the serious mafia dons that were against the drug trade and replaced them with dons that would be a part of it, working with the CIA and flying it into America with the United States Air Force.
Okay, and of course, as I said, I know we need to wrap this up. Well, a similar thing happened over in Russia, not with the mafia, but with the leadership. Remember, was it, Brezhnev died, was it 81, 82, right around the time Ronald Reagan became president. And so the next couple of years, they probably had about as many leaders. They had Krenenko and Dropov, and Ronald Reagan made the joke. He said, well, by the time I learn the name of the new Russian leader, he dies. And then finally, they brought in, in 85, they brought in the relatively young Mikhail Gorbachev.
I got background noise there, George. I don't know what you're doing.
Well, I'm sorry, it's raining here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm still working in my $50,000 studio, but a recording studio. But as soon as that money comes in, I can let you know. But we probably should be ending on this note. So you had a bunch of old Russian leaders who are 70, 80 something, who are holdovers from the old Stalin era. So the Jesuits said, you know what, we need to get rid of the old guard and bring in the new blood. That's why we're going to kill them off.
That's right.
That's just pure speculation on my part.
That's what they do. Yeah. So I agree with your point, George, and we got to close this out now. So I want to give you your contact info and sum it up.
Okay, so they had to, before I give my contact information, they had to clear the deck, so to speak, the holdovers from the old Stalin era to bring in Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev was alive when Stalin was alive, but he was just like barely an adult. He was born in 31 and Stalin died in 53. But he was not, but Gorbachev was not part of the Stalin power structure. And as a matter of fact, Putin was born in 1952, the year before Joseph Stalin died. So he obviously was not part of the Stalinist power structure.
Yep.
Okay, so I think it'd be a good idea, as you said, to give my contact information. If people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. georgewidger1969@gmail.com. As I said, if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, if there's a topic they'd like me to cover or go over again, please let me know.
All right, Brother George, well, thank you so much for being with us today. Brother Eric Jan Phelps here at 24/7 World Radio on a podcast until we get set up with another host. It's February the 19th, 2024, and I trust you have enjoyed this broadcast and putting the meat on the bones of the International Military Order of the Society of Jesus as it runs the papacy, the mob, the intelligence communities, the governments of all nations. And if they get out of order, they just bring in the American military government and put up a dictator to bring things back to papal control. But that's how we have it here in 2024. May God send a great reformation, a great awakening. May people wake up, realize that death is imminent, and they need to truly believe the gospel, that Christ died for their sins, was buried, and rose again, and then to begin to tell the truth no matter what. So, Brother George, thank you for being with us today. Send your gifts to Cash App at Eric Jan Phelps, EricJonPhelps. Happy to take a gift there, or you can send a gift through PayPal at rbpbdonate@comcast.net. And hopefully we will meet again this week with Brother George. Until then, Maranatha.
Oh, go us.